am I supposed to make up data for the steps for the data process, or can you offer any information on framing that question for the Louisiana data so that I can get started?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, let me go ahead and pull that up and share
I know that
it with
was
everybody.
a lot. I'm coming like into like this, brick wall when I try to frame a question, and I'm like, ugh! Like I understand the data and the trends, and there's a lot of state and district data, but there's that middle school report card, and that's really the only specific. So I was trying to formulate questions and frame one, and I roadblocked.
I understand completely. So, first of all, let me just kind of put your minds at ease, guys. When I used to do a lot of coaching in my consulting business as well as in my other jobs and stuff, my two favorite coaching questions are, what's the worst thing that can happen? And, are you overthinking? So I think in this case, and I find this happens in EDL 707 every single time I teach it, don't overthink this, okay? This is the tools that I'm sharing with you are tools that we developed when I was an area superintendent in Dallas to really kind of teach, because keep in mind, we were a large school district, 160,000 students. We had approximately 12,000 teachers. So how do you move something to scale with that many people? And so as a green person, I'm like, oh, pretty easy. I can make up a question about anything, because I'm all about the big picture. It's hard for our goals because you want to know every little thing. And unfortunately, because we're not in a real situation in that, I'm not the principal of your school, or I'm not the consultant who comes in to walk you through all this, the data that I share, because I have to be careful, because of FERPA and, privacy laws and all that. So I share generic data, okay? Now, in an ideal world, though, when you do these tools, I want you to be able to take it and apply it to your situation. So I gave you the Louisiana state data. If you're in Texas, it's really simple. You can pull down the state level, by district, by school data, and then you could probably even access your own student data. And so you can use this tool. It doesn't have to just be based on the Louisiana data that I provide. You can use your own data as well. But I'm going to go ahead and share the actual tool so you can see what Ray's asking about. So give me just a second here. Pull this up. Okay, can everybody see it? Thumbs up. You good? Okay, so this is the tool. It's the first tool, and it's called How to Frame the Question. So you have to know what questions to ask. It's kind of like one of my favorite tools that I used with students was, what did you learn in class today? I never asked them, how was class? How was school today? It was always about, what questions did you ask? What did you learn today? How are you going to use that? Because sometimes the question that you ask will help to define what it is that you need to know. And that's what this is designed to do. So for example, so here are some guiding questions that we gave as examples. So what do we want to know? What are we attempting to measure or monitor? What questions are we asking? Why is this important? So something you may want to know about the data, right? Your question that you gave about, do I need to break this down by objective? What do I do if that's not available? Those are perfect questions that go right here in this column that says do it yourself. Because what else do you need to know to be successful in your classroom and applying the learning? Does that kind of make sense? There's not a wrong question. Because I don't know what you need to know. I know what I would need to know, because I know I'm sounding really ridiculous.
I guess I thought I had to propose a question based on the middle school data. And I had to formulate specific questions about the trends from the state district and middle school. No.
This tool is designed because like I said, I know what I know. I don't know what you know. So my questions might be vastly different than yours. It's all about helping you to think through, if I'm going to analyze data, and I'm going to go from general to very specific, what are the kinds of questions that I might need to ask to get me from this general piece to the specific? So right here, you know, like you were talking about with the middle school data, so how did the students perform on the LEAP test in grade 7? How did they perform on the LEAP test in grade 8? That's pretty general. Okay, that's one way to approach it. Another way it could be, another way you could look at it is, how do I know what this breaks down into by objective in 7th grade math or 10th grade or whatever, okay? You see what I'm saying? The questions you were asking me are these right here, the general part. Then as we get more specific, for example, I don't know. So for the middle school students, what student expectations and objectives for reading were the lowest? For 8th grade students, what students' expectations and objectives for math were the lowest? I don't know that. I need to know that if I'm going to do a deep dive analysis. Then you're going to take it even further. And you don't have to answer the questions. You just have to make up the question. So then to make it even more specific, so if I need to know what student expectations and objectives for reading were the lowest, so how does this compare over time? What is the trend? How do I identify the trend? Does that make sense? You're not answering anything. You're literally just coming up with more questions. Does that make sense? I can tell by your face you're kind of like, yeah, maybe.
So we can just apply it to, you know, like our past year, maybe if we notice that our grade level.
Yeah, that would be way easier if I could use my own students. Yeah,
Absolutely. If you've got that data, use it. What I provide is for people
perfect.
who don't have any data. Okay? But yeah, if you've got your own data, use it. And like I said, the nice thing is that if you use your own data and you've got it, you're going to have a really nice data analytic piece to open school with. Oh, and somebody wanted to know which assignment. This is in Module 3. We're looking ahead a little bit. Okay? So use whatever data makes sense to you, yours for your classroom, yours for your school or parish or district. If you can't find any data and you don't have any data, you can use mine. But I'm going to tell you right now, mine is very, very global. You're not going to get into a deep dive because I can't provide that without getting 10,000 parent permission slips to share student data with you. Okay? Does that help?
This may be a silly question, but because I've done a lot of work already and read all of your data and analyzed it because I'm a gold person and I'm very detail oriented. So like I've already done like the PowerPoints and like answered all of those questions. But for the actual like steps, the worksheets, can I use my own data?
Yeah.
So it would be like kind of different sets, but I would still complete. You're okay with that? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And guys, keep in mind, you know, the beauty as well as the difficulty of this particular class is, the good news is there are no set right answers. The bad news is there is no set right answer. The goal is for you to be able to look at different tools and mess around with them in a pretty safe, risk-free environment to learn what it means to really analyze data. And like I said, I don't get hung up on right or wrong. I just want you to think it through and to be able to justify what you come up with. And like I said, for the goals, that drives you insane because there should be a right answer. The greens of the world, for most of you that have had, you know, EDL 700 with me, or you're in it with me right now, you're like, hallelujah, my kind of assignment. You know, for the oranges or our Norths, they're already doing it and they don't care. They've just forged ahead. And if you're a blue person, you're like, but that makes me feel really anxious and I don't know what to do. You just got to let it go. Don't overthink it. What's the worst thing that can happen? I tell you, this isn't really what you're supposed to do when we do a one-on-one Zoom, and I let you redo the assignment. That's the worst thing that can happen. But at the end of the day, when you sit, if you're in ed leadership and you're going to sit for that certification test, I want you, when they start talking about data, however you say it, analytics, that you're like, oh, I remember. Or when they talk about guiding or essential questions and stuff like that, you're like, oh yeah, we did a tool like that. Does that make sense? Does that alleviate some of the fear? Okay. And if it doesn't, honestly, just email me. I'll do a one-on-one Zoom with you and I'll walk you through each one of them. I don't mind doing that at all. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. So for the assignment this week, maybe I'm overthinking it. I have a really bad habit of that. Do we have to answer all of those reflective questions and then have like citations on it? Or do you kind of just want us to reflect on what we've done and what we've kind of learned and then, cite some extra sources that kind of support our argument?
Yeah, I'm pulling it up. So hang on one second. Let me get here just so everybody can see what we're talking about. Okay, so we are now in Module 2, which is this week's. So you've got, and by the way, I know this, I think most of you have seen my responses, but I know some of these links, they work for me. So I can't always tell when you tell me the link doesn't work, why it's not working for you. One thing I do know for sure is if you will copy and paste this into Google, you shouldn't have any problems. But if you're still having problems, I created a new folder. Let me go back just to show you where that is. It says right here, articles and online readings. I just went ahead and downloaded every single article for you and put them in this folder. So you can either use the links or you can go to the folder, but they should be the same, okay? So let's talk about this particular reflective question. So you're going to read the article, how to tell a story with data. You've got these things here. You're going to watch this little video clip. And then here are the questions, okay? So as a part of this inquiry, part of the data improvement process, how should you use inquiry to create, data overview? I'm not going to read these to you. But in a 1 to 3 paragraph essay, yes, I do want you to address each one of those questions with citations, so I know which reading you pulled it from. But you're also welcome to go outside of the readings. There's a lot of great material out there, guys, that you may want to use instead of the references I'm giving to you. You don't have to, but you can. Now, remember, I'm not looking for a dissertation. This is a 1 to 3 paragraph thing. But these questions are designed to be interwoven, so it's kind of like one leads to another. So, for example, if you've, how should you use inquiry? Okay. Have you done it at your school? If you have, give me an example. If you haven't, then what process did you use? If you've done a data inquiry piece at your school, then, you don't have to tell me what process was used. Talk about what has been effective. It's really about, I want to make sure you're understanding the reading, but the most important element is give me those examples so I can see that you can apply what you've learned. If you don't have an example, be honest. We don't do this at my school. It would be helpful if we did this component, and here's why, maybe the follow-up. If your school's doing a lot with data, just tell me about it. And again, I'm not looking for specific answers. I'm looking for, did you understand what we're talking about? And can you either relate it back to something you're doing, or can you see into the future on how you might use this? Okay, does that help?
Yeah, and do you want more direct quotes for our citations? I guess it's been a while since I've done actual writing like this. I just want to make sure I'm clarifying it. Do we need more direct quotes and then the direct citings, or kind of just cite oh, here's some sources that I've used?
Honestly, Olivia, you can do it either way. Some people do the quotes, and and that's what I love about APA style. If you do a quote, you don't have to do the footnotes and all that I had to do as a double major in English. You just do the parentheses with the author's name and the year. If you're summarizing something from an author, you should probably cite it the same way, just at the end of that summarization. Again, your parentheses with the author's name and the year.
Okay. And if there's no author on an article, is it just the website?
Yeah, you can just put the website, or even most of the stuff that I pulled, I'm trying to remember, came from Harvard, their websites. Or you can even just tell me, I'm looking at the links here, that it's ASCD.
Okay.
Or HEPG.
Okay.
Because those are very well-known organizations.
Also,
Okay.
if you need help with APA, if you Google APA, I don't remember if it's OWL something. There's some
Purdue OWL.
Yeah, and if you just type it in there, it'll show you how to.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify on that because I was kind of nervous about doing that.
Yeah, and I go pretty easy on the first essay with everybody, and I may, I don't redline anymore. I got over that. But, I may just tell you, hey, this is kind of the way it should be done. Yeah, and if you're not reading the chat, Richard just put up their citation machine is really good. I have Grammarly downloaded that, so it automatically checks everything I do, which is nice. Yeah, and I didn't realize citation machine. That's a good one. It automatically creates your citations. Oh, even better. And yeah, and I'm one of those people, I like models. It's easier for me to look at an example to make sense of it. So I like Purdue OWL. Is also a good one. EasyBib is good as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, guys? For Module 3, you're making up your own questions, Caitlin. I gave you examples, and then you make them up based on your data from your school, your classroom, your district, your parish, whatever. If you have no data, then again, you can use my very global data, which should be very easy to generate lots of questions about what you need because I didn't give you everything. Okay? All right, guys, well, let me switch back over and let's go ahead and kind of get started here with the PowerPoint. Oh, I hate this, sorry. I always forget I've got to share first before I go to the PowerPoint. Okay, there we go. Okay, can y'all see the PowerPoint? Thumbs up, we good? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get it started here. Maybe, there we go. Okay, so one of the things that I have found very interesting, the more I've looked at data and the role in the school and all of those kind of things is, some people would say that as a teacher, as a leader, that you need to be a data expert. And I agree in the sense of we do need to understand and use data to improve instruction and therefore improve student outcomes. But whether or not you would classify yourself as an expert or not is where I begin to struggle a little bit. Even though I teach in ed leadership and curriculum instruction, I actually work in the College of Business, and specifically with the Masters of Healthcare Administration. And sometimes I feel like they're speaking Greek because they'll talk about all of these programs for data analytics that I've never heard of. But I really know a lot about data. I know how to use it. I know how to manipulate it for the good, for the bad. I know how to massage it. I know which pieces matter, which pieces don't. I know how to apply it. But sometimes I don't. I feel like I said, when I'm talking to business people who have a different set of tools that they're going to use than we do in education, I feel lost. So don't get hung up when we talk about being an expert, because I think it's pressure, but it doesn't need to be. So I'm not going to read the PowerPoint to you. You're perfectly capable of reading it for yourselves. But one of the things that I think data can do for us in a very powerful way is it helps us to reflect on our practice, to plan purposefully for what it is we want our students to achieve and accomplish, And it will help us to really move away from that subjective view of what our students are doing to a much more objective view. When I was first starting out as a teacher, I was teaching in special education. And I kind of realized after about 6 months into my role as a teacher that I was starting to forget what normal looked like. Because I was working with special needs students, and within that population of students, there was a spectrum. There were those students who were doing really well. They were on grade level. And then I had students that were 3 and 4 years below. I had students that were 6 and 7 years below. And I started thinking that that was normal. And so I really had to learn very, very early on in my career to use the data about achievement to ensure that I was instructing my special needs students in the way that they needed to be. Because the goal was to get them all back on grade level over time. So data provides that objective view as opposed to my lens of just looking at my students subjectively. The other thing that you have to know when you're thinking about how do I become a, quote, data expert, data is much more than those end of the year scores. I look back and I really need to write letters of apology to all of my teachers where I made us spend hours upon hours upon hours going over, the data that we got in the spring to start off the new school year. It was a waste of their time and mine. We have to think about data as a way to really investigate and look at our students so that we know where they are, and we have to know where we want them to go. Data provides the why we do what we do. It also provides us the roadmap on how we're going to get there. And we're going to talk more about that as we go on. So, data is not black and white. A lot of people say statistics and numbers don't lie. That's really not true. I think that data is really more in that gray area because 2 things that are critically important. Number one, the context in which the data was gathered matters. Secondly, we have to know how, why, and when to use specific kinds of data. So what are those roles and responsibilities? Yes, the numbers are important, but they're not everything. Any of us that have been in the field for any length of time, I'm sure you know what it's like on testing day when your student, who's does great, is really, really top of the class, comes in, they've had a horrible morning at home, something happened, they got in a fight with their brother, they were running late, they didn't get to eat breakfast, there's a million different things that happen. And they sit down to take that test, and they don't do as well as we know they're capable of. So that number is important, but we also have to understand the context of why that student didn't perform at the level we know they're capable of. Because it's a picture in time. It's one snapshot. It's not that cumulative work portfolio for the student. That's my problem with accountability, that we don't look over time. We look in one day, one test, one situation. And we think that that tells us everything that we need to know about, gosh, call me crazy, an 8-year-old or even a 16-year-old. We also have to think about how we can use data to find root causes. Oftentimes, we only try to address the problem without really looking deeper. So it would be sort of like going to the doctor and you've got a broken leg, but you also have a blood disease. And the doctor only treats you for the broken leg, not knowing that this blood disease is going to really hamper and impair your ability to heal. He didn't look at the root element of that health diagnoses. We oftentimes do that in education. We look at those standards, we break it down by objective, and we say, gosh, Tracy does not understand generalization. When in reality, Tracy has a hard time with her reading fluency, and therefore she didn't get through everything she needed to on the test, and really does understand generalization. She simply ran out of time. Root causes matter. We also have to think about how do we use the data that you see every day that happens when you work with your students? In my book, that's the most powerful data, way more powerful than what we're told on a state assessment. We also have to know the difference between historical data and current data. I really firmly believe that teachers need to lead data analysis. Now, before you freak out on me, we're going to talk more about what that means. But really, when we do data, it's really about questions you come up with as a teacher because you're closest to our client, you're closest to our students. And how do we make things happen using tools like data walls, notebooks, etc., to take that stigma away from it's data, it's statistics, and it's math, and I hate all three. We have to move beyond that and see these as the powerful tools they can be. You know, one of the other things too that if Tracy were queen of the world, I really believe, just like I don't think you can teach reading and writing in isolation, you know, they have to go hand in hand. Reading and writing and spoken word and all of that, vocabulary, etc. It's also interwoven. You cannot split them apart. I think the same thing is true about data. In my ideal world, data exists as part of a professional learning community process. So, for example, if I'm thinking about data, and there's a lot of people out there who say you need a data team that's separate from your professional learning community or your team. I don't know. I tend to blend the two together. So if we're thinking about what kind of questions we ask around data, we have to first think about, are my students demonstrating in growth and learning? What do I need to change to accelerate that growth? And then what do I do if my students don't, if the data is showing I have students who need remediation? Well, if you know the PLC process, there's three main questions in that as well. What do we need students to know? How do we know if the students know it? And then how do we know, what do we do if they don't learn it? They're essentially the same. So if you've got one group over here doing all this data stuff and another group over here addressing the traditional questions of the professional community, it doesn't make sense. You see what I'm saying? Those two processes need to be married. The other element that I would fold in as well is really understanding good instruction and what this looks like in practice. So if you think about the remediation or the RTI model, response to intervention model, we have to make sure that when we're looking at data and we're talking about what we do within the PLC, what does that look like in practice? So in my ideal world, and part of the way that I approach this particular class is you've got data, you've got a professional learning community that's developing and working on instruction, but you also have to make sure you have best practices in place. So we have to ensure that we have good first instruction, and that happens for 95% of our students. For that 5% that don't get it, we can get the other 4% caught up through reteach and remediation. But then there's always going to be that 1% that needs intensive support, that may need a referral to special education or to speech or to, I don't know, the dyslexia committee, whatever. But ideally, none of these exist in silos, okay? You have a PLC, a data team, you're looking at good instruction in the classroom, and that should all be happening in a cycle. So let me break it down just a little bit more. So, like we were just talking about, when you work in silos, you create more silos. So you've got this group who's expert about data, but they're not talking about that in the PLC. And the PLC is this expert group who is planning interventions and instruction and all of those kind of things, but they're not in the classroom making that happen with the teacher. So in an ideal world, this is really more of a spiral than it is a hierarchy or anything like that. So data cannot exist in a silo. It has to be interwoven with effective practice. So I did this little graphic for you where we're trying to get to student achievement, and then all of these other things are happening within a spiral. So you may have a group that's working on data-driven instruction and classroom design. You may have feedback and coaching. You may be teaching best practices. You may have that professional learning community. But this is all happening all the time. And it's really hard to show on a graphic, but I can give you later on, I'll share with you some examples of what that looks like in practice, okay? So today we're going to talk about two data models. The first one on the slide that looks kind of like like I said, a spiral, or a weird shaped, I don't know what that is. This is from DataWise. This was developed by Harvard. They say there's 3 main components: prepare, inquire, act. So the first thing that you're going to do is organize for collaborative work, build assessment literacy, create a data overview, dig into the data. Then you're going to examine instruction. You're going to develop an action plan. You're going to assess it, and then you're going to act upon it. So it's that same idea, that it doesn't exist in a silo. The next one is the model that we developed in Dallas based on DataWise, but we kind of viewed it a little bit differently. So again, at the center of everything is student achievement. How do you do that? You have to have good questions, a data-driven dialogue, and there has to be feedback, because again, nothing exists in silos. And as you can see, it's very similar. So frame the question is pretty much the same as organize for collaborative work. And you move around this circle by constantly doing these things to improve the outcome, which at the end of the day is student achievement. So let's talk about the kinds of data and what this means. And again, I'm not going to read it to you, but people often think the only kind of data that's used in education is student data. That's not true. In a really effective school system, data moves across entities and across the entire organization or system. So we should be looking at student data. We should also be looking at teacher data. We should also be looking at infrastructure data and financial planning, because if our student data tells us that our students really need to understand probability and statistics, and we know from teacher data that our teachers really don't know how to teach probability and statistics very effectively, that's a development piece. So I need to make sure within that budget that I am planning for the cost of the development, the professional development for teachers to teach probability and statistics. I also need to make sure in that budget that I have some hands-on learning materials for my students to use to learn about this. We also have to look at students' well-being, social and emotional development as well. So you see how that cycle really matters? It's not just one piece. It all has to coexist to be effective. We also need teachers to have literacy around data. So when I start talking about data, nobody freaks out. We've talked again about each one of these components. So what does that look like? So data literacy is your ability to understand and use data effectively. That's all it is. We get data from so many different places. We get it from accreditation standards, we get it from teaching standards, etc. We do have barriers that make this challenging and difficult, but fortunately, if you're sitting down creating all of these data charts and stuff by hand, the good news is there's tons of free technology out there that you can use to create your data that you don't have to do this. And you can just really wow and impress your principal, or if you're an assistant principal or principal or whatever, your boss, with using these great tools. So let's talk about, for just a second, some of these data analytics. So, like I said, I work in the School of Business, and I've stolen some of their things and I'm moving it over to education, because they figured out a long time ago, you input some numbers and it's going to spit out all these beautiful charts and graphs. It's going to prioritize things. It's going to do it for you. So we're going to talk about what some of those look like. But before we do that, I want to make sure you understand the different kinds of analytics that go along with data. So when we talk about teaching data analytics, it talks about tools and methods that we use in educational design to see if our design of that instruction is sound. And it generates for us feedback and things like that. When we talk about learning analytics or student outcome driven or student achievement analytics, it's really reporting on data about our learners within a specific context, so we know whether or not they're being successful. Teachers need both. So if I know what it is my students need, and I've got all of my data that backs me up, that's great and wonderful, until I walk into a classroom and I look at how that particular strand is being taught. Okay, so if like I said, if I know I need to be teaching probability and statistics, unless I spend time in a classroom looking at a teacher's instruction around those things, I'm not going to know if that instruction is going to impact the data or not. Kind of makes sense? It's sort of like, I'll go back to when I was an elementary principal. We knew that one of the areas that we were really struggling in mathematics had to do with the difference between perimeter and area. Okay, so everybody knows when you measure perimeter, it's just, if you've got a square, you're going to add up the 4 sides. Area, it's length times width. Very different. You get 2 different numbers. So we knew that. We had broken it down. We saw where we were. And I thought, great, we've got it figured out. It wasn't until I was in classrooms observing that I noticed many of my teachers did not understand the difference between perimeter and area. They were teaching both concepts incorrectly. So I had lots of data. We'd broken it down. I knew what we needed to do, but my teachers weren't delivering the right instruction. So that teaching analytics became the essential component to get to the root cause of why we weren't doing well in that. And it was as simple as a 15-minute teach the teachers how to do it the right way to improve that student data element. Does that make sense? See why they can't exist in isolation? Because oftentimes we do these in isolation and then we wonder why the outcomes don't change. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing is what's happening in the classroom. Okay? So there's some really simple tools we're going to talk about. The first one's called Plus Delta. I love this one. It is so simple. You get a chart piece of paper. You divide it in half. You draw a line straight down the middle. On one side, you put a plus sign, and on the other side, you put a delta. If you don't know what a delta is, that's just a little triangle. Pluses mean everything that's working for us. So let's go back to my example. We knew that we struggled with our elementary students. We weren't doing well on assessments when it came to area and perimeter. So what was our pluses? Well, we figured out what the problem was. We were able to see that there was a trend across grade levels, that students were struggling with this. What was our delta? The fact that we figured out our teachers didn't know how to teach. Very simple, easy, everybody can understand it, everybody can follow it. Plus delta. And we'll talk later on in the course about what you do once you have your pluses and how you address the deltas. I think most of us are familiar with Excel and spreadsheets. Pretty easy. Put your data in there. You can do all kinds of formulas and look at trends. But there's a couple of others that I really like. One of them is called Rapid Minor Studio. It's free. I use it fairly frequently. I can download or upload, I guess, depending on your perspective, maybe some data from a spreadsheet or even from an assessment into it, and it allows you to do all kinds of cool manipulations, and it does it automatically. So let's say that I gave a test on perimeter and area, and I put in all my student scores, and it's very simple. I put in, Tracy got 80%, Melissa got 95%, etc. Put that in. It gives me all these wonderful charts and graphs, tells me if it's a normal distribution, etc. ClickView does something very similar. Very, very easy to use. I'm not as familiar with that with some of the others, but my data friends or my ed technology people say that these are super easy. And I've given you the website so that you can go and look at them, but these are all free resources that can help you. There's also some free data tracking apps that you can literally use in your classroom, and these are all educational. And again, formative assessments, you can build the assessment in there. You can have your students take the assessment and the data is automatically uploaded. PBS Learning Media is a really good one. Most of us are pretty familiar with Kahoot. That's been around a while. But the one I really like is Socrative. Socrative gives you cool, fun learning activities. You can do a quiz. You can do what's called space rockets, etc. But the nice thing is that once the data's in there, it manipulates it for you. And it'll tell you what are mastery levels, etc. So again, all free. They come with very easy to use instructions and stuff that literally it's there for the taking, which is nice. So, talking a little bit more about Socrative. So, for example, it does space race, quizzes, and exit tickets. I know one of the things that we had taught our teachers to use was to do some sort of a demonstration of learning every day before students left the classroom. And one of them was an exit ticket, the best kind of formative assessment. To let you know whether or not the students mastered what you wanted them to learn that day in class before they left. And I love the fact that this does an exit ticket for me. And it automatically has all my data, so I don't have to go through my 100 index cards at the end of the, my day to figure out who got it and who didn't. And creating my stack. So they've got it, they're good to move on. They need just a little bit of help. Oh gosh, I really got to do a lot with this. It does it for you. And like I said, it gives you live results that you can email, export, or downloads. So it also gives an explanation for a correct answer when the student gets it wrong. And we know from a metacognition standpoint that students need to learn what it is that was wrong about their answer, that really helps them. So a lot of people would say you need to have a data team. And this is some of the work we did when I was in Dallas. Now, like I said, I'm not opposed to data teams, but they've got to be working alongside, hand in hand, with your professional learning community, as well as looking at not only that objective data we get from assessment, but also that qualitative data that we get through observation, dialogue, and others. So again, I'm not going to read through all of this for you, but they really, sorry, I guess my picture cut off part of that slide, sorry. That they really support campus-driven, data-driven decision-making. And how do they do that? So they do kind of, and like I said, in this instance, it really is sort of a PLC idea. So they make instructional decisions, they communicate goals, and they also look at the results. Because far too often, we do data analysis by analyzing the data. And then if we're lucky, we actually use that analysis to plan our instruction. But very rarely do we move it into going back and looking and seeing the impact of the instruction, and then being very transparent and sharing what we were trying to do, how we actually did with everyone on our campus, including the students. So let me just walk you through some of the work we did. I was specifically in charge of what we called the Woodrow Wilson Townview Schools. If you're from Dallas, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not, don't worry about it. It's just the way that we geographically group schools. So it was schools within this sort of far old East Dallas thing. So what we were trying to do was to get a model to also make sure that we were following the district's instructional initiatives. And we did a lot of research. So these are some of my favorite books that I still use and I still have on my shelf. I have the pleasure and honor of being able to go to Harvard and study with Richard Elmore, who wrote The Instructional Rounds in Education. Great coaching and data gathering tool that is completely non-evaluative. It's based on the idea of, when residents in medical school do medical rounds, it's the same kind of idea. Only teachers kind of serve as residents and do teaching observation rounds to look for trends and information. So again, we've talked about this model a little bit, so pretty easy to follow. And we started by framing our questions. So, like Ray was asking earlier, what did we need to know? What was it that we really needed to know from a data standpoint to improve student achievement outcomes? And so we started with that piece. So what information needs to be answered? No right or wrong answers. We kind of talked about this already. So, we would ask ourselves, what do we want to know? Well, I want to know why on the ACT, my students were scoring lower than the state average. How do we even address ACT preparedness in the high schools? I didn't know. That was one of my questions. So for my 11th graders or my juniors who were taking the ACT for the first time, what does those score breakdowns look like? What was it like by school? Because I remember I'm dealing with multiple schools. What does it look like by gender? Maybe by ethnicity? Maybe by teacher? Why is it that Ms. Barnhouse's students do incredibly well on the SAT and the ACT, that Ms. Williams' class doesn't do well on either measure? Now, I'll tell you, because Ms. Barnhouse was a real teacher superstar. She had been trained by Dewar Smith on the SAT, and she interwove all of that into her teaching. It was awesome. Miss Williams was a brand new teacher. She was struggling just to have a lesson, let alone wove stuff in. So, we were able to scaffold and get her up to speed. But again, frame the question, no right or wrong answer. It's just what I needed to know to move everybody forward. One of the other questions, why is this important? Well, because, one of the district's mission or one of the district's goals was to have, our students college and career ready. So why was this important? Well, we wanted to make sure our students had options and choices and were prepared for after high school. So that was important to us. Then when we got down to specific, what are my concerns about my current instructional program? I could see differences, even though the populations of students were very similar, I could see differences across my schools. So why was it that Woodrow Wilson High School was greatly outperforming Hillcrest High School on every measure, even though they had similar populations? Why was that happening? What was, this was my concern. And it may be, if you're a principal, why is it that, Miss Barnhouse is outperforming Miss Williams? What is the root cause of that? What's different maybe about her student population? Is that part of it? Was it that Miss Barnhouse had the gifted and talented or the advanced level students and Miss Williams had all of my second language learners? I just kept having to dive deeper and deeper and deeper. And the whole idea is to keep pushing those questions so you get to a root cause. So what are some resources? Well, in Dallas, just like some of you have talked about, can I use my own data? We had a data piece. And if you want to look at some of these tools, it's still up and it's freely available to anybody. This is the website if you want to look at some of the work that Dallas was doing around this. And they still are. I still keep in touch with a lot of people there, even though I've been gone several years now. And they're making tremendous progress. In fact, they were just named the best urban district in the country in terms of improvement of student achievement. They went from, 50, 60 low-performing schools out of 204 down to, I think they're down to 1, which is pretty amazing. Some good stuff that you're welcome to steal. Just take off the logos. So where did I get this from? So there's the video side. There's also some books, for those of you that maybe, want to do some additional reading, or you're like, gosh, I'm going to be an instructional coach next year. This would be really helpful. In addition to DataWise, which is a great book, there's some other ones too that you might find helpful, or maybe to add to your professional library. And just the pictures of the books. So, okay. So, what questions do you guys have? So somebody wanted to know, do you type the questions into the template? Yeah, you can do that, or you can make your own template, whatever is easiest for you. And if your district has something that they're using that pushes you to come up with probing questions or essential questions, or people use different terminology, you're welcome to use a different template. It's not that mine's golden. It's just fairly easy to use. Okay.
I was going to say I bought the DataWise on Amazon. It was like $30. I know people got it for cheaper, but it was like $30 on Amazon, and it's been a game changer. It elaborates on things. It connects the dots for me. Being the gold person I am, attention to detail. It is very nice to have that to lean back on. So I'm about halfway through, and it's really, really good.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. Yeah, I agree with you. And quite honestly, if your school is struggling with data, most schools, the librarian has a little bit of a budget for professional library stuff, this is a book I would definitely ask her to buy, him or her to buy, or your principal. Because what I love about DataWise, and that's why I don't know, Texans are just different, and Dallas is even more different in that we think that we have to take other people's good work and make it our work and change it just enough to make it different. You know, in this day and age, if I were leading a school or I were still in the role of leading principals, we would just buy DataWise and follow their process because it's excellent. It's very well done. It pulls all the elements together, and it shows you step by step what that data spiral looks like. And there's a lot of places you can get the book. But also, too, you may want to go to, gosh, I can't remember the exact name of the website. Let me pull it up here real quick. I've got it. I think I've got it bookmarked. But it's called DataWise Harvard something. Yeah, so it's called datawise.gse.harvard.edu. And they have lots of free resources. And if I just put in Google DataWise Harvard, and it's the first thing that comes up. There's tons of free materials there that you can use, as well as they do a couple of courses that are fairly inexpensive, if I remember right. Let me look at their course real quick here, see if it's going to work. So they've got their books and stuff listed. For some reason, there it goes. Yeah, so they've got courses. It's free. It's an 8-hour course, and it walks you through DataWise. So, you know, again, you know, one thing I always appreciated when you could find free resources, but they've got also on here protocols that are free, documents, videos, tons of stuff that if you're in a position to influence as a teacher, or if you're leading a school, or, you know, in a role as a coach or whatever, I love the fact that this is free. And, you know, you can walk with your teachers through this. And 8 hours is nothing, really. I mean, if this became the frame for what you're doing. So, good stuff. And then if you really want to get bold, Harvard Graduate School does, they're like seminars, mini courses that are like 1 to 2 weeks in the summer, and one of them is DataWise. And so you get to go and learn from the people who created this. Dr. Bodette is one of them, and it's phenomenal. And it's, I mean, it is costly because it is Harvard, but you know, a lot of schools have title funds for professional development and stuff that you can do. There's a couple of organizations, if you're in Texas, one of them's called Raise Your Hand Texas. They will scholarship people to go. You know, there's a lot of teacher grants out there for professional development and stuff too. So if you have a chance, you know, I work for the LSU system, and here I am promoting the Harvard one, but they do it really, really well. And it's pretty cool to get to go to Harvard for a week and study with the best of the best. And I know when I went, I've gone a couple times to different things. We were in the law school, and my seat in the lecture hall was where Barack Obama sat when he was in Harvard Law School. So that was just kind of cool to be able to say, you know, gosh, you know, you feel like you're in the presence of these incredibly great individuals and anything. Okay, any other questions, guys, before we close it out tonight? Oh, thanks, Ray. She posted the actual link here in our chat. Thank you.
I do have a question.
Yeah, Demarcus, go ahead.
Okay. You were talking about, as an administrator, discovering that your teachers were confusing, I guess was area with perimeter.
Mm-hmm.
Suppose you are a supervisor and you don't know whether they're teaching the incorrect or not. You go in there and you think it's fine because you don't know enough of that topic to do that. Because I know that's happened before. What do you do?
Yeah, good point. You know, like, for example, when I would go as a high school principal and observe the physics teacher, I had no clue whether or not what the physics teacher was teaching was right or wrong. I was just lucky to be able to follow along. So one of the things that instructional rounds that whole process and idea is, it's like you do in medical school. You have a group of residents led by an expert. So we started doing instructional rounds made up of teacher teams. And so if we were going to be going into the physics classroom, I knew who my superstar physics teacher was, and I knew he was good because AP Advanced Placement had him be one of their graders. The district always called on him to write curriculum. You know what I'm saying? He got like everybody through the AP physics test with 4s and 5s. So I knew he was really good. So if we were going to be observing in that instructional round process in the physics classroom, that was the first thing I asked him. I was like, okay, you know, as we're walking out, I'd whisper, okay, any content errors? And so he would tell us if there were content areas, so we knew that. But the whole idea behind instructional rounds is to look at practice. It's not to evaluate the teacher. And so it's a very collaborative, shared process that really, really works great to look at practice, to decide if you've got content areas or content errors. If it's not a content error, maybe it's an implementation error. Maybe it's an engagement problem. But it really focuses you on what needs to be happening in the classroom in a very non-threatening, just here to help everybody get better sort of mode. So that would be my suggestion. Always have a content expert unless you know for sure that you are the content expert in that area. Okay, does that kind of help? Okay. Yeah, Richard, yeah, if your English language art teachers were doing something wrong, you wouldn't know. See, if I were your principal, that's my area of expertise. I would be able to tell you. You know, but also too, don't be afraid to do cross content teams. So for example, we were noticing that our math teachers were really having a hard time with student engagement because they were teaching to the whiteboard, or they were teaching to the chalkboard or the overhead. They weren't teaching the children. And I could not get them to understand and see what real student engagement looked like. So I took them, we had common planning periods by content area. I took my entire math department to watch my dance teachers teach. And they thought I was crazy until they started really watching them. And then they saw actual true engagement, and they saw how the teachers were using lots of mathematics to teach different dance sequences, choreography, moves. They're like, that's geometry, that's that. And I'm like, yeah, see? And I remember it was one of those great aha moments as a principal when my math teachers looked at me and went, now we see what you're talking about. I'm like, you know, geometry, have them move, have them do some of these things. Because teachers can learn across different areas as well in a really pretty exciting way. Just like music, take them to a music class. You know, math teachers, music is math. It's counting, it's fractions, it's all those kind of things. Okay, any other questions? Caitlin, your baby's adorable. Okay, going once, going twice. Okay, guys, I'm going to let y'all get your Wednesday evening back. Thank you to those of you that had to spend 2 hours with me. And for the rest of you, I hope that it was a short 1 hour. So talk to you guys later.